4 days ago, I introduced to you a thin strip jig right here. And I made this up on camera as I was doing the filming. Well, since then, this has turned out to be an extremely popular video. So much so that I've had hundreds of comments, and I have read each and every one of the comments. And there has been some suggestions made as to how to improve it. Today I'm going to do a couple of the upgrades that were most popular, and I'm going to show you how it works after I do the upgrades. The first upgrade is to narrow this piece right here. This is way too wide, so I'm going to literally cut it in half. Now keep this in mind, most of the thin strips that I do are 1/8 of an inch or less. If you're going to be doing, let's say, a 1/4 inch strips for, let's say, a canoe, you would need this strip even thinner. The next upgrade is to fill this area. This kerf line needs to be filled with the stock to give support to the material as you run it through the blade. Right now, it does not have any, and that's not a good situation. So I'm going to cut a thin strip to fill that gap and make it to the height of the wedge itself. Now this actually is important for two reasons. You need to be able to give the board support as you run it through. Also, without having that there, you really are not going to be able to keep your thin strips consistent in the actual size. I'm using an 1/8 inch drill bit just to see if that will fit in there. And actually, no, that is too tight. So I'm going down one smaller, and that will fit in there just right. So this is actually a 7/64 drill bit. There's also been some suggestions, instead of having this fence move just left and right, actually have it move at an angle. I don't think that's going to make a significant change to be able to keep this closer to the blade. So at this point, I'm not going to do this. I'm only going to make the two alterations down here. So with this 7/64 inch bit, I'm going to place that right here on that kerf line. And I'm also going to bring this down so I can keep it square. Put that right there. I think that will be perfect. And then I'll tighten this. Now I can run my thin strip and have the filler that I need for this kerf. I find that using the drill bits is the perfect gauge to use to set up this thin strip jig. Now this wedge is actually glued on with the CA glue, so I'm not sure how easily it is to be able to remove it. So in lieu of that, I'm just going to make a mark on the wedge itself, about 3/4 of an inch. Now again, if you're going to be using this to cut wider, thin strips, make this even less. But this strip is just a line that I marked on here at an arbitrary location, and if I take the tape measure, that looks like it's about 3/4 of an inch, or approximately 15 millimeters if you want to use the millimeters. But keep in mind, this will work well for the materials that I oftentimes cut. If you're doing a little bit thicker strips, make this even thinner. To be able to make this cut, all I did is just set the height on the circular saw to the thickness of this material. I put a little waste board under there so it'll keep it level, and I'm just going to cut that off. And I'm just using the line that I made to be able to cut this. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. All this does is separate the thin strips from the blade itself. Now the only thing that's holding this on is the CA glue. And the whole thing came off. But that's all right. If I had thought that this wedge would come off this easily, just with a few taps of a chisel, well, I would have taken it off and cut this thinner on the table saw. But that's okay, this worked well. I'm going to use a chisel now just to clean up this material so it's flat again, because there's some of the plywood that broke loose. And I'll just glue this little strip back on. So here's a look at the strip that I cut off, and now that will fit right on here. Now one of the things that I can do is I can actually glue it back exactly where it was, or I can actually glue that over to this area. But what I want to be able to do is actually fill this gap. So I'm going to glue this right back to the exact location where it was to begin with, and then cut this 7/64 inch strip to be able to put in and fill that gap. So I'm using some medium Starbond glue, and I'm putting just one bead right down the full length of this strip. I want this to be secure and hold without breaking loose. Now again, there's not a lot of pressure that's on it, but I don't want to take a chance on this breaking loose while I'm actually using the jig. This is now cut thinner, and I made this wedge a lot shallower of an angle to be able to allow for thicker, thin strips to be able to go through. And I've cut my 7/64 inch strip that is going to fit right into here. And you can see that's a nice snug fit. So I'm gonna grab some glue and I'll put this in position. I'm gonna put some glue all along this edge. Now this was a scrap piece of wood that had a hole in there. That's really not gonna make a difference. I'm also gonna put glue on the bottom side of this. And then I'll take and put that right into that spot. It's a little bit of a snug fit. That fits real good. So I'll put a few clamps on here to be able to let this glue dry. Once it's dry, we'll be able to test out this jig. Now with these improvements, I made this so that now when this slides through and it catches this back here, it'll start bending away from the blade. The further back that you have this really is better. I like to have it, from my experiments, about 2/3 of the way back has worked out real well. Now I also cut off the edge of this fence. One of the things that I found is that as I pushed the thin strip through, it was hitting that corner. Did not want that, because that would not allow that thin strip to be able to bend. I could cut this fence shorter, but I think this was a good solution just to cut that edge off so that the thin strip would not hit that corner. So that allows the thin strip to begin bending earlier and not being stopped by that corner. Now the thicker the wood that you have, the thinner this wedge needs to be. And for 1/8 of an inch, this works real well. But as this thin strips get wider, this will need to be thinner. All you want to be able to do is have a small separation between your thin strip and the blade. Adding this strip of wood on the back actually creates basically the same thing as a joiner. So as you run this through and cut it, it will run right along that edge and give this material support. And you're not going to bind it against the blade itself. I like having a clamp in the center. This works real well. On the first video, I clamped it down here, but I like it clamped in the middle because that gives all the support right here where all the action happens. As you're cutting thinner and thinner stock, you certainly want to use your push stick to be able to support it and keep your fingers away from the blade. So I'm going to take a 1/16 inch drill bit and I'm going to set this speed square right up on my line. And then I'll just use the bit and slide this over. I'll slide it over there, tighten it, come down to this end, tighten this, and that will give me a 1/16 inch space, which will give me a 1/16 inch strip. Well, now's the time to tell to see if this is actually more accurate and more stable. And as I shove this thinner stock through, it catches the back perfect to give it the support. The thin strip is peeling away from the blade, and as the stock that I'm using is thinner, I'm using a push stick to be able to keep my fingers well away from the blade itself. So now let's measure this thin stock and see just how thick that it is. So I'm going to grab the calipers now and let's take a look at this thin strip. If you measure that, that is 1/16 of an inch. That is absolutely perfect. So I'm very, very impressed with the accuracy of this thin strip jig. You can see that it works extremely well and extremely accurate. But that's not good enough. Let's set this up with a thicker strip and see how it works. So this time I'm going to use a 1/8 inch drill bit, and we're going to set it up the same way. The drill bit itself works as a perfect spacer to be able to get this alignment exactly where it needs to be. With the speed square in place right along that curved line, the 1/8 inch bit provides a perfect gauge to set up the fence. Okay, let's test it out. Let's take our stock and run this through our thin strip jig at 1/8 of an inch to see just how accurate it is with all the improvements that we made to see how well this will cut. As I run it through, the stock is getting supported on the back side behind that blade. The thin strip is peeling away from the blade, and that's exactly what I want. So that's working out extremely well. And with this thin stock, yes, I'm using a push stick to be able to carry this material all the way through so that my fingers stay away from that blade. Okay, let's test it out now and see just how accurate this thin strip is. It should measure 1/8 of an inch. And there's the 1/8. So you can see that's very accurate. I want to thank everyone for providing a lot of comments and suggestions on how to improve this thin strip jig. I think the improvements made and the suggestions that you gave turned out to be fantastic. So this is going to get a lot of use in my shop over the coming months and, quite frankly, years, to be able to do the thin strips far more safely than I've ever been able to do it before. So if you like this video, by all means, give me a thumbs up, and don't forget, hit that subscribe button down below so that you'll see more of this type of video. Now take a look at these videos right over here. This will give you some more tips and tricks to be able to use in your shop. I look forward to seeing each and every one of you in the next video, whatever that happens to be. But for now, bye-bye everyone. See you real soon.